Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Streaming Media West today, that's right. So I've been on a little bit of a travel trip and I'm a little bit buzzy. I've got a head cold, and so I'm going to try and not cough too much and too often and too loud. But we have a great session. We've got the longest name that I've ever been in a session for, the business strategy behind the fragmenting OTT market. It's a great title, but it was a lot easier when they had the old ones, the ones that were things like OTT, friend or foe. So let the panel introduce themselves and answer that question. OTT, friend or foe?
Jimmy Scheffler, OTT friend for the time being, but that could shift accordingly. I am the chairman and chief service officer for the last 20 years of the Carmel Group. We are a Carmel by the Sea based consultancy. We focus on the video world, have for the last 20 years. Began in the direct broadcast satellite industry, following companies like DirecTV, EchoStar, US Satellite Broadcasting, AlphaStar, and PrimeStar. Grew that out into the broader pay TV industry, which of course included cable, and then eventually telco, and then grew that out into the broadcast industry, and then grew that out into the over-top broadband streaming media business. One thing I wanted to just set up today, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but in my mind, the subscription video on demand model is broken, even including Netflix. And as we get into it, I want to give an example of that. And as we get into it, I want to give an example of a solution and then an example of that. So I'll leave it at that.
My name is Michael Doobie. I run streaming media for NPR, so anything that's non-traditional radio distribution. For us, that's not just audio these days. There's a ton of video that we're doing as well. I'm formerly of Showtime, HBO, ABC News, and I spent some time at Accenture building Netflix-like solutions for Global 500. And I would say OTT is definitely friend. I view it as just the latest form of distribution. So, you know, in a few years, I think that you know, we'll have a new acronym that we'll all be fretting over, and
yeah. Hopefully,
and then we'll have panel discussions on that as well. So,
thank you.
Is this working? Yeah, it's working. Okay. My name's Amit Ziv. I head up business development for Epix. Epix is a JV between Paramount, Lionsgate, and MGM. We're a premium TV network. That's really the DNA of the business. Was modeled about 6 years ago about multi-platform distribution and really controlling that shelf space and monetizing our assets across, really across platforms. And so Epix has exclusive rights, subscription rights to all of the first-run theatrical output titles that come out of Paramount, Lionsgate, and MGM. Movies like The Hunger Games or the Bond franchises or Wolf of Wall Street, whatever it might be. We have almost a 2-year exclusive window, again, in the subscription window, what we call Pay One. And as a service, we really maximize the value of those assets across both MVPD households and really OTT households, and sometimes when that merges as well. So on the MVPD side of the house, where we have 4 linear channels branded as Epix. Those channels are available in over 50 million MVPD households. Some of our biggest and best distributors are Time Warner Cable, AT&T, Verizon Fios, Dish, Charter, Cox, the list goes on. As part of that relationship, we have TV Everywhere apps, also across any important platform that we need to be on, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, Roku, iOS, Android, Chromecast. We just launched offline viewing or temporary download within those apps as well. I think we're actually the first network to launch that ourselves. What is that? What else? Hold on, I think something's going off my pocket. And then on the OTT side of the house, we have deals with Sling TV and PlayStation Vue. Those are what we call virtual MVPDs or multi-channel linear OTT services, where we offer our branded linear channels and also do business on the OTT SVOD side with Amazon Prime and Hulu Plus. So I
But
would
no more Netflix.
no more Netflix. So I would say for us, while we're very much focused on growth in MVPDs, OTT is certainly a friend, and as you see, MVPDs are also moving down to launch their own OTT digital extensions as well. So certainly a lot of opportunity out there.
Lots going on. Our fourth guest, unfortunately, couldn't join us. His name really is Cary Grant. He really is the CEO of Primo, and he had some family business he had to take care of, so my apologies. Meanwhile, my name is Jim O'Neill. I'm the principal analyst at Uyala and also the editor of Video Mind. It's an agnostic industry blog daily that you really should be reading because, you know, my kids need to eat. So it's www.videomind.com. It's a really solid site. It's hosted by Uyala, but as I said, it truly is agnostic. Previous life, I was editor of Fierce Online Video, Fierce IPTV, Fierce Cable, Fierce Telecom, and that was actually one job. So it's not like they fired me. And then between that and Uyala, I was at Parks Associates as an analyst looking at the cable TV industry, TV everywhere, and we have so much to talk about. So the last speaker sat down and said, okay, how many broadcasters, how many this, how many that, how many cord cutters? Yeah, baby, I love it, good to see. Cord nevers. None? One. That's good. Multiple SVOD services. And you get them because they're cheap and they don't cost a lot of money, and that's why they're in trouble. But not to worry. You know, we always talk about OTT as being the big disruptor. This is, you know, disruptive technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Until about 3 weeks ago, every time I was going out and doing customer meetings and all this kind of stuff, we kept saying, OTT is the future. OTT is the future. Well, that's bogus because we all know OTT is now. It's happening. Everybody in here watches OTT to some extent on some device at some point or another. And that change is just continuing to happen. A study out yesterday showed OTT penetration is about the same in the US as cable penetration, 71% to 77%. And I say cable because it's actually cable. It doesn't include satellite or telcos. Comcast, Cox, Dish, Verizon, all have recently launched OTT plays or about to launch OTT plays. Some of them are really bad. Some of them are not really, really bad. But they're really not, I don't think, what we're going to see 5 years from now. And we'll talk about that at length. HBO, Showtime, Starz, CBS, direct-to-consumer. Who'd have thunk that 2 years ago, right? Yeah, likewise, right? We talked about that, in fact. And then TV everywhere, ubiquitous. Everyone in the world has it. No one uses it. I mean, it's crazy, right? You know, something like 93% of all pay TV customers in the United States and in Canada have access to TV everywhere. Nobody uses it because you have to remember your account name, you have to remember this, you have to remember that. Authentication is crazy. I was at a conference with the head of Turner, and he was talking about how he's got 3 houses. John Martin, I've got 3 houses, I've got TV everywhere. I don't use it because I don't know how. So that says a lot about where we're going in that direction. And then, of course, the big 3, Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu. Does that leave room for anybody else? Where are we headed? Next, the question I want to ask is just a content one right off the bat. And I think this is great for you. I mean, how about AT&T and Viacom? And when they finished the deal, AT&T announced this was the best content deal for us ever. What does it mean to other content players? What does it mean to the industry?
Sure. So I'm not going to speak specifically for that deal, since Viacom's also a part of our family. But listen, it's an industry that is going through transformation. MVPDs, if you take a structural view, have maximized penetration rates of multi-channel video households. They've been at about 100 million for the last few years, and now they're starting to lose subs. It's really been a function of share shifting over the last few years as opposed to growth in the industry. That's a recipe for consolidation. Consolidation on the distribution side may or may not mean consolidation on the supplier or programming side. That leads to bargaining power and leverage becoming more and more important. I think that when people start bashing the MVPD world. I think they tend to forget that MVPDs, cable and telco, control broadband, and broadband is a much higher margin business as well. So to the extent that MVPDs really go all in, I think there's certainly a big opportunity for them in the OTT space. And I think as a programmer, such as ourselves, especially being subscription and premium, the sky's the limit. I mean, we can go and offer and add value to those guys across their entire, to all their subscription types. AT&T merging with DirecTV, 26 million video households, I think 15 million broadband households, I think 50 million smartphone subs. I want to be in business with those guys. I don't want to bet against those guys. I'd rather go add value to them and monetize my great movies across that entire footprint. Now, is there going to be a shift in the business model? Absolutely, and that happens. But you know, I wouldn't write them off so quickly. A lot of smart people working there, and certainly have scale. And you know, we're in the business of scale, and while the bundle may be changing, it's definitely not going away. Direct to consumers, you mentioned. I think for certain programmers makes a lot of sense. I think for certain programmers it makes no sense, and it's more R&D than anything, or it's at least market signaling to show that there's growth. I'm sure they're not making, there's not substantial revenue and earnings coming out of those businesses in the short term.
But bigger content owners are okay with that.
Meaning?
With consolidation. They know they're going to maybe not get quite as much, but they're going to have a little easier time selling into a bigger company like an AT&T DirecTV.
I mean,
they have more exposure.
It's not okay or not okay. It's happening. So
right.
You might as well find a way to add value for each other. Because, you know, once one pie isn't growing like it used to, but the other pie is growing. And, you know, I want to be in business with guys that have 50 million smartphone subscribers and not be in the onesies and twosies direct-to-consumer game.
Absolutely. Michael, what about those smaller content owners? What does it mean to them as far as, I mean, I heard a collective gulp among the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cable operators because they knew that the deal that AT&T just got was going to cost them down the line. And I suspect, smaller content owners felt the same way, that it was going to be made up somehow.
Well, you know, I think what we've found as a general trend is that distributors are just hungrier and hungrier for content. At least for us, sort of the idea of OTT has actually opened up a tremendous amount of opportunity for us. There's places now that our content is going that historically was never an option. I mean, so for instance, we're on Roku. We've got an app for, you know, a lot of our video content on Roku. We're finally getting into airlines. And even as far as I'm concerned, sort of the connected car market for us, believe it or not, is I sort of see as part of that OTT opportunity. And we're in like 80%, I think, of cars getting sold today. There's an NPR app there. And I've been going to some of the content conventions similar to this, but everyone there is either a content creator or there's somebody who's looking to buy content. And I've seen the folks that are attending that, you've got a lot of folks who aren't your traditional content creators who are now attending that because the call and the need for content is outrageous. And for me, what was very notable last year was the WWE sort of going into or stepping into that direct-to-consumer OTT market. And for them, and for a lot of folks, the reason why I think it's been so slow for adoption is because of the existing agreements with cable companies and your traditional distributors. And I don't think it's that distributors don't want to go OTT or that content creators don't want to go direct-to-consumer with OTT. It's more about navigating those licensing agreements, some of which are still quite a ways off, you know, to just be able to find those new destinations for your content and new ways to monetize.
We're all looking for that 5-year ring around the tub that says, okay, now I can negotiate, right?
Absolutely.
Jimmy, consolidation.
Well, one comment on the AT&T Viacom deal. About 6 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Charlie Ergen out of Englewood, Colorado, looked at his traditional 14 million subscribers and said, this is not a long-term viable business model.
He said that again yesterday, by the way.
He said that repeatedly.
Yeah.
And he instead looked at a broader plane. And he not only 6 years ago hired a guy by the name of Roger Lynch to start something called Sling TV, which to me is on the level of hype, real good nouns and adjectives to support a big deal, much more so than the AT&T Viacom deal. I think that's truly hype. Sling TV and its subsequent deal between Iger and Ergen to bring the ESPN, the ABC channels in to be the backbone of Sling TV, that was a game changer. That was something real. Now, when you ask the question,
PlayStation View just announced the same deal for their
What's
own
that?
service. PlayStation just announced that they just closed their Disney deal, I think, 2 weeks ago. So
The Sony View,
now on
yep.
their virtual MVPD service.
right, but I guess what I'm getting to, 2 years ago when it was first
Yeah,
announced between Iger and Ergen, that was a game changer.
Oh, absolutely.
That shook the entire
Yeah.
industry, and that set a whole new set of cards out
Right.
on the table.
Yeah,
which they've been
absolutely.
playing ever since.
I agree.
But
But they're also in the base package. That's why.
That's right.
That they're still in the most widely available tier. And I think that the challenge for other programmers is that they have the risk of not having all their channels be in that skinny bundle. And that's a risk for ad-supported networks, absolutely.
Right.
And that's sort of I think that's the fundamental challenge and structural hurdle that's going to prevent some of these guys. I mean, Charlie could do it because he had DBS leverage, right? That's why he could do that deal.
Well, there were a lot of reasons why Charlie did it. It wasn't just
Not
he-
because, why he was able to do it.
Right,
He
that
was able
too.
to do it because he's doing huge deals with Disney anyway for Dish and the DBS side of the house.
Well, he's a good card player.
Oh,
He's a real
absolutely.
good card player, and he has a good rapport with Bob
Right,
Iger.
yeah.
But you asked the question initially about consolidation. And I'd like you to re-ask the question just to clarify exactly what you were getting to.
The consolidation of the cable, of the pay TV industry in general.
Right.
It's going to impact content costs. It's going to impact consumer access. It's going to impact all those things. How good and or bad is that for the industry in general? And then let's talk consumers for a minute.
Well, right now, I'd say in general, I do not like consolidation. I do not like the fact that somebody who used to be a competitor is no longer willing to stay up later or get up earlier in the morning in order to compete against somebody they competed against before. And frankly, I am of such a mind, having watched what happened with Time Warner and Comcast within the last 6 months, I think the Time Warner cable and the Charter deal is in trouble.
I think so too.
Yesterday, EchoStar came out against it.
Yep.
And when EchoStar came out against the Comcast Time Warner deal 6, 8, 12 months ago, nobody thought much about it. But it became the foundation upon which all of the ball began rolling. And I think right now there's an awful lot of greed out there among very big companies and among very big shareholders to get more of the pie. They see that as the only model that works. And I think there's going to be a lot of resistance in Washington. I think there's going to be a lot of consumer resistance to that, which is going to make it to the ears of their representatives. And so I think some of the politics that's going to flow, what will ultimately be very determinative of that is what happens in this month, a year from now, as to which way the political bells ring.
Well, it's interesting that not only EchoStar, but a couple of smaller, Wealth TV, for instance, at one point they were backers of the consolidation. They thought it was a great deal, that Charter has always been very friendly. And then yesterday they said, we've been thinking about this, and we're trying to get an anti-compete deal out, or a clause out of a contract with them, and they won't let us go over the top.
Right.
And so they've now thrown their weight the other way. So, Michael, you have something to follow with? You have a...
So it's, I think that consolidation it's sort of like that double-edged sword, because right now, I think the user experience from the end user standpoint it's a bit difficult, right? And so even when you look at something like Apple TV and their latest incarnation, they finally came out with what is supposed to be a universal search so that I can search through everything, and it's still fairly broken. And when I look at that, I'm sort of hungry for that user experience to get better, but then when I compare that to your traditional cable box navigation, you can sort of
grid.
search, but good luck discovering.
Right.
And so I think
People
that...
seem to like X1 and X2, I think.
Well,
I mean, at least, it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think Cox actually just announced that they're taking that on. Comcast wholesaled it as a white labeled
Well, increasingly as they bring that piece of it to the cloud,
Yeah,
and they can change the UX all the time, and they can change search and discovery, make it a little bit easier,
So I think they
recommendation.
understand that it's a challenge.
Right.
But yeah, there's room for improvement, absolutely.
And I think consolidation certainly makes it a bit less of a competitive environment for those selling content. There's just less options out there. But certainly I think just from a consumer experience, I think it's all gonna settle down and come out in the wash, but it is very difficult right now. There's a ton of very high quality programming that me as somebody, and I'm not a true cord cutter. I only have a cable box because I actually get my internet cheaper by having a cable box in my house that has never gotten hooked up in over a year. It's...
Should hook it up.
Well, for the occasional football game, but it's really, I have my Apple TV hooked up and I have a couple of other devices, and most of my consumption ends up being through that. And also, by the way, my kids, 11 and 14, and there's 3 other boys in that household, 5 boys, nobody's watching linear TV.
Right.
Everything is Netflix, Hulu, and frankly, mostly YouTube. Which is also sort of an interesting thing when we see, by the way, YouTube coming out with their paid service to help to float what is supposed to be higher quality content into sort of that kind of viewing experience. But one other thing too is that sort of that linear viewing experience, there are still those of us who kind of grew up with that and sort of clicking through the channels. But you've got a new generation that's not how they're looking to consume stuff. And by the way, in addition to just sort of the overall cable company health and obviously wanting to stick with what's working and what's making a tremendous amount of money, we're seeing that digital ad spend, or the ad spend, start to shift more and more towards digital. The bottom line though is that when you really think about the whole ecosystem, there are a ton of people who don't want to go that way.
Right.
Because there's so much money in that traditional model. Even the linear channels, you get cable, you've got your 2,000 channels, you might watch 15 of them, but the cable companies, there's so much money there in the ad market for all of those channels that none of us watch, that moving over to more of an OTT-ish kind of delivery, I totally understand why your distributors are clinging to that traditional model for as long as they possibly can. There's just way too much money there. Even like you look at Nielsen and you look at just how money is made there, and it completely gets decimated and blown up as soon as you start to move to the digital side, up to and including your cable companies that for a few years now they've generally been vaguely ready to start giving us all cable boxes that aren't doing sort of your multi-channel over coax, and really it's just an IP-based delivery depending on what you're picking, and they're really slow to roll that out because the metrics become a lot more granular. Your advertisers would like that, but everyone else sort of in that ecosystem does not want that. And no matter how much of that money keeps transitioning towards the digital side and the ad spend, the huge chunk of money is in that traditional linear television experience.
Well, go ahead, Jimmy.
As long as a CPM on this for YouTube is 10 cents and a CPM on the big TV in your living room is $10, that's going to rule the roost for a long, long time. And just to bring it back real quick and add maybe one more tree in the forest for the consolidation question. Can I ask a question of the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
How many
it's all
people
research.
in here think that at the end of the day, the Charter Time Warner deal goes through? Please raise your hand. How many think it goes through? and I'm guessing maybe a quarter. How many think it doesn't go through? About the same. And how many people didn't vote at all? Don't really know. That's about even more. Okay.
But why don't you think it's going to go through? Because last I read, Comcast Time Warner didn't go through because according to FCC definitions of broadband, they had over 60% market share
Right.
on the broadband side of the house.
Right.
I don't think that's the same equation on the
It's
Time Warner.
it's very high, especially once they also pick up Bright Cove. So when you add Bright Cove and Time Warner
Bright
Cable,
House.
Bright House rather.
Yeah.
Thank you. When you
Yeah,
add
Bright Cove?
oh, those guys.
Well, one of the reasons
Oops, sorry.
I think it's in trouble is because that ball has already begun rolling
Yeah.
down the hill. There's a
Right.
precedence that has been set. So, yeah, you could say, well, it's apples to oranges in terms of the basic data and those people that have been affected in the broadband world. But I think what's really important to realize is the broadband world every day, every week, every month gets more and more important. And more people realize it is a utility.
But isn't that why they just passed net neutrality?
Well, net neutrality is a whole nother issue.
Right. And it's extremely competitive and extremely high rivalry across both the incumbents and all of these new distributors, whether it's, again, Sling, Sony, or any of the SVOD distributors. There are a lot of options out there.
Right,
So-
but my point would be the same as in the Comcast Time Warner deal. When you've got one entity with that much control and that much potential to screw up the whole thing for everyone else, that's what gets people worried. And that's why I would say it's becoming less and less certain every day for those.
So let's move away from the FCC for a minute, because I saw somebody yawn and it was me. But it's that whole FCC thing, you start throwing that out there. So let's talk instead about the strategy behind the OTT fragmentation, and let's talk briefly about bundles, okay? So a couple of weeks ago, Les Moonves is on Bloomberg, and he says, I sell to Netflix, I sell directly to my competitors, because that's what it is. It's about friends and foes, and we're all working in this together. It's the way the industry is going to be. And he said that I get complaints from my own people at CBS All Access who said you can't sell it to Netflix because it's a great series and we've got to do it because I'm selling to the best bottom line. How does Epix survive its own infighting on that kind of level? Because it's got to be, right? I mean, you don't want to piss off the MSOs. Right?
Yeah, good question.
And so you're going over the top and you're getting pretty aggressive about that. TV everywhere, regardless of how well it works, it's there.
Yeah.
And I suspect that someday you guys will go D2C as well.
Well, we are not in the direct-to-consumer business, if that's what
This
you're
week,
asking.
yeah.
We are in the wholesale business. We
Okay.
like to be wholesalers.
Yep.
The reason being that we still are experiencing growth both in OTT and in MVPD households. Whether it's new launches or our existing subscribers in the MVPD ecosystem have been growing tremendously over the last 12 months alone. That is driven by flexible and creative and innovative packaging that we can offer our MVPDs that the traditional premium model hasn't really done in the last 20, 30 years, where premiums were offered for $20 a la carte, where we get a lot more aggressive in coming up with creative offerings.
Does it involve
how do we not
firstborn children? Or
cannibalize? And then you layer on windowing, and it's really a function of windowing,
Yep.
and you have to maximize value across those windows. We have a distribution strategy where our MVPD partners have a more favorable or earlier window than our OTT distributors. And that has allowed us to really drive subscriber growth for our partners for MVPDs because they can utilize all of the big movies that we have in their marketing campaigns. And we've still been able to do that downstream with the OTT distributors, and it works. And it's a healthy business, and we're in the same ballpark as Les Moonves.
So you learned your lesson from Starz and Netflix and that original deal. And the damage that did to the community.
Well, they also, I think, got like $20 million from that deal. So, that was their problem. I think.
Yeah, but at that time, $20 million was like, woohoo!
Well,
baby,
I don't know.
you know?
Should Google what our deal was originally. It wasn't $20 million. So I think money talks at the end of the day. To your point, I saw Malone speaking on a CNBC interview, and it depends on the money. It depends where you are in your life cycle.
Right.
It's not a black and white answer. It makes a lot of sense for certain programmers, and it doesn't for others. The question is, how do you protect the certain segments of your business and still add value for all these different partners? It doesn't have to be either or, right?
So Jimmy, the bundle, does it exist as it is? If it doesn't, what happens to all those small content pieces inside of it? The CWs that are part of the bundle for CBS, the ESPN 2-3U, et cetera, that are part of the ESPN bundle. What happens if that bundle breaks? And does the bundle break?
I was asked to write a piece for Multi-Channel News for a blog that I write called Mixed Signals, and we looked at what is happening to the bundle. And the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, the industry's in chaos, and so the status quo is going away quickly, and the bundle is in big trouble. But when you really look into it from the standpoint, say, of legal matters and contracts that are long-term and traditional values and people in the industry who've been doing it for decades and want to stay in the industry and want to keep making money, it's not as simple a conclusion.
Yep.
So I would say the bundle's around to stay for a long, long time. Although, I would say at the same time, it's going to be under an awful lot of pressure, and so you're going to see a lot of creativity,
That's right.
especially from the over-the-top online side of the world. You're going to see a lot of new ideas. There was a session over here. There was a gentleman at the luncheon speech. I think his company is called
Eversport?
Eversport.
Yep.
And that has caught, I'm a long-time ABC sports person, and that started my career there. And I know how important sports and news and live TV are to, or how important sports is, especially to the live TV linear model. It's really the only thing that holds it up.
Yeah.
And for a company like that to come in and say, we intend to shake up the bundle even more, and they've already begun succeeding because they're saying to the industry, look, you buy a bundle of rights, you don't show certain of those rights or those shows that you've asked to be part of your bundle. Your contract needs to require that then goes by default to somebody else on another package. That's an example of the kind of creativity, the kind of legal and business affairs kind of thinking that starts shaking up the bundle.
What do you think about Yahoo taking over the NFL game a couple of weeks ago?
Another example. Another really good example. And we will see more and more of that.
Anybody watch that NFL game? Yeah, that is the problem. I watched that game in Michigan because, thank God, I was on the East Coast time. And it's kind of weird watching a game at 9 o'clock in the morning, but it was interesting. I watched it on my iPhone. I watched it on my iPad. I watched it on a iMac. Yes, I'm an Apple guy. And I watched it on an Apple TV on a 60-inch screen. I watched it all at the same exact time, and it was pretty damn close to flawless. I was amazed by it. And in fact, my cable provider on Thursday night did a crummier job providing that Thursday's game than Yahoo did. And and so that's, that whole piece of, well, we're not robust enough to deliver live sports.
Well, and I think that your normal televised sporting event is stepped on, from a compression standpoint, is stepped on so badly that the quality of that game that Yahoo did was beautiful. And frankly, even when I look at NBC, CBS, et cetera, and through my Apple TV, that's how I had watched it. But normally on a Sunday, I'm seeing if I can consume some games through my Apple TV. The viewing experience through those is difficult at best. It's really tough to, there's so much, buffering, and Yahoo did to their benefit, they did a beautiful job.
An amazing
with
job.
that. Yeah.
So I was going to get into a big fight with you guys about a la carte TV, just because we can, right? So go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, what I was going to say about something that's televised in the OTT land especially sports, is these companies like Sling TV, they're virgins. So a lot of people are scratching their head right now and wondering why Sling TV, for example, doesn't have more subscribers this much into the game. And an awful lot of the reason is because they're still trying to figure it out. And the technology is one of the best examples in Sling TV of how they're still trying to figure it out and how it's not perfect. And they've had a lot of trips so far, and they probably will have several more. But ultimately, the formats and the standards and the equipment and the software, it's going to come together like we know TV, because we as a society have this expectation of 99.999% quality when it comes to our video. That's not going away. And when you shift from linear TV and traditional TV and broadcast TV to IPTV, that expectation is going to be there as well. So.
Study came out yesterday, I think, and addressed the idea of SVOD and whether, and people love their SVODs, their SVOD subscriptions and how much they liked it. And they asked about frustrations, and their first frustration was lack of content, the real content they wanted. And their last frustration was quality, which amazes me, because I think, I was on a panel with a Major League Base, ML BAM guy, and he said that they generally get a pretty easy go of it when they're showing something live. They struggle a little bit. People still expect that to happen. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of forgiveness right now. I don't know how much longer that lasts, but at the moment there is a lot of forgiveness. So content is king.
Yeah, absolutely.
Consumer is king.
Sure.
Who's bigger?
Who's bigger?
Yeah. Who really runs it? Who's really pushing it right now? As a content guy,
Look,
I get it.
Consumers are looking for good content, so that's really what it comes down to. And if you want to look, I look at it, because the question was always, is content king or is distribution king? And I think that over time, that really depends on where you are, which year you're talking about. But at the end of the day, even the Netflixes of the world are competing on content, and they don't want to be competing on price. You want to compete on differentiation. You compete on price, you kill your margins. So at the end of the day, you need good content, and that's really what it comes down to.
Michael?
I tend to think that distribution is king. And I know that's probably a very unpopular sentiment, especially with folks that make content. But there's a bunch of industries where, whether it's television or even the music industry, you can make an excellent product. If you can't get it out there, it's relatively unknown and folks don't even hear about it. And for instance, Amazon right now has Emmy-nominated shows. Most of us don't even know that they're there, and if we do, if we're not an Amazon Prime member, and even then, it's like not always easy. It's a weird kind of viewing experience compared to some of the other, compared to your Netflixes and your Hulus. But there's a bunch, and frankly, even Yahoo. I was actually shocked when I went to watch that game. I saw that there were original shows that Yahoo was putting on. I started to watch one. I was like, this is great. I've never heard of it. I probably never would have heard of it if it hadn't been for that football game. And so I really do think that, sure, we as consumers, I think that we're driven by the content itself, but if you don't have easy distribution, there's a line that we as consumers aren't going to cross in terms of effort to get to that content.
I completely disagree. The Carmel Group was asked...
But I disagree with all three of you, so this is going to be very interesting.
The Carmel Group was asked to do a white paper for IBM, and the white paper was about data analytics. And one of the clearest messages that came out of that was the example of Netflix and House of Cards. They didn't follow the traditional pilot process. They didn't spend the money to take the idea of House of Cards out to a trial audience. They use their internal data. And that's the future of our industry. It is data analytics. It is finding out, not just for shows like House of Cards, but for advertisements and for things people want to buy, from houses to cars to toiletries.
Netflix didn't even develop House of Cards. It's a show that's owned by Media Rights Capital, and they shopped it around, and they paid $6 million an hour. So that's really what it comes down to.
Right, but Kevin Spacey does this amazing 45-minute speech that's on YouTube, and if you haven't seen it, it should be the foundation of your career in one part, because he really steps through where the industry's going, and this is already a couple years old. But he says Netflix had the data. They knew that their viewers would watch House of Cards, and on that they based a $100 million 5-year commitment, and now Netflix is scheduled to go, I think, into 2023. 13 seasons are already being looked at. And that's how they're now positioned to spend more money, I read yesterday, for content and building original content next year than all of their competitors
Right, but
combined.
everything you just described says that they're investing in the content. If Netflix was a library service, nobody would watch it.
No, but what I'm saying is what gets them to the content is the study of their consumer.
But
So
that
the
brings up
consumer
another great
comes
point.
first.
And we're going to jump
Oh,
right
the consumer, sure.
And we're going to jump right into this. This is another brand new piece, okay? And this is because, boy, are we running out of time. And do you guys have any questions? No? Okay, great. So,
Hey, what a moderator.
anybody have any questions
You had
so
one
far?
one up
Love to
here
get
on
some
the left.
input from you all.
Right up here.
How come nobody's talking about HBO? Seems like they're kind of leading it because they have premium content, bundling stars, Showtime, and their platform to directly compete with them.
HBO's an incredible service. They're not bundling Showtime and Stars.
They are in the Nordic.
Oh, maybe in the Nordics, not in the U.S. It's a fantastic service. I mean, there's nothing to really speak badly about them. They have great exclusive movies, and they have the best original programming in the business.
But what's really
And
interesting
for
is
them,
that
they needed to show growth. Their U.S. footprint, I think, has been around 30% penetration for a very long time, and
they just
have
got
the
tired
brand,
of,
and they've-
of the cable operators not selling hard enough. That's really what it came down to. There were 10 million households out there, now 17 million households that are just broadband only. And they looked at that and said, this is a great market, let's go after it. But what's interesting is there's only, I think, 2 operators currently offering HBO Now as part of their services, so that you can make it an easy buy. And so there's a lot of angst there as well.
So there's a couple of things. One is about 4 years ago, HBO realized that, and this was just when HBO Go was coming out, or sort of an Apple that they were reaching for, but over 80% of people that didn't watch, let's say, Game of Thrones live, instead they were going to SVOD, or they wanted to watch it after the fact, 80% were going to HBO Go, as opposed to going onto their cable box. And I think part of it is quality. The other part is even just that maybe richer viewing experience.
Well, the user interface is so much
that you get
easier.
there. And by the way, HBO Now, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that's a direct-to-consumer experience, because it's not, right? You still, your money as a consumer is still going to somebody else before it goes to HBO. And HBO, quite a few years ago, got rid of their backyard satellite dish business because they didn't want to deal with customer service. And that's actually a huge thing for a content owner. We're all of us up here on some level are like, yay OTT, we're like, we know it, we understand it, like, we're feeling it. But what a lot of us never think about from a distribution standpoint is, if you want to go direct to consumer, that means you now have to start dealing with customers. And that tier 1 customer support is outrageously expensive.
managing the billing relationship.
Other questions? We have
HBO
2
got out
minutes
of
to
that
go.
business.
Other questions?
Subscriber
Let's go ahead.
acquisition.
So I'm an ex-CAA and a current IBMer, and I was just listening to the whole conversation. Sling TV was a CAA deal. The House of Cards, the CAA package program. And from my point of view, I just wanted to have input on the concept of the difference between disintermediation through the distribution channel of the creators to the consumers versus that customer support piece. That right now, because of the cost of customer support, you're actually losing the analytics information that Netflix, for example, is getting. And I don't know that having House of Cards necessarily brings up revenue for Netflix or not, but it certainly brings up viewer satisfaction to use those analytics to
Absolutely.
understand what content to produce.
And it brings up their PE ratio for their stock so that they have the justification to spend the money on all of the
Well,
additional content.
Nobody knows what their actual ratings are, but that's because they have that. They don't have to justify that externally.
Right.
Because they're surviving as a subscription service
That's
right
right.
now. But if you step outside of that model and you look at a pay-per transaction model, or you look at sponsored revenue, I'm just wondering from your perspective, there's two pieces. One is the idea of churn and reducing the churn, which if you have something like unscripted live events like sports driving that, then you can keep that because it's always new content, it's always interesting in a live event,
Right.
versus having that whole headache of managing customers. And is there some way to connect the two where you reduce the churn because you have the analytics capability, but you're not managing the headache of disintermediation?
So who can answer that in 30 seconds or less?
You guys can.
I don't want to touch that one in 30 minutes or less. That's a study. That's a white paper right there. That's a great question.
So, and with that, we are really, truly out of time. Come back next year we'll talk millennials, we'll talk about recent survey and young kids,
on
we'll talk
down.
about mobile, because we never touched on that, but we'll do it again. I want you all to thank these great panelists
Thank
who
you.
really laid it out there.
Thank you.